Ethan Caldwell stood at the edge of his property, holding a photograph he hadn't touched in 25 years. His hands were shaking. Not from the cold. From the memory of the woman in the picture. The woman he was supposed to marry. The woman who died because he wasn't fast enough to save her. He pressed the photo against his chest and whispered the same words he'd whispered every single night for a quarter of a century. "I'm sorry." That was the moment a stranger's voice came from behind him and asked the one question that would finally break him open. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to this channel and follow Ethan's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Ethan Caldwell hung up the phone and stood completely still. His hand was still gripping the receiver. His knuckles had turned white. The voice on the other end had been cheerful, polite, just a county clerk confirming that his property tax was overdue again. Nothing dramatic, nothing life-changing. But Ethan couldn't move, because the clerk had called him Mr. Caldwell. And for one terrible second, he'd heard his father's name instead of his own. And that had pulled him backward, 25 years backward, to the last morning. His father ever looked him in the eye and said, "You had one job, son. You had one job, and you let her die." Ethan set the phone down slowly. He walked to the kitchen sink. He turned on the water. He splashed his face. He gripped the counter with both hands and stared at nothing. This was how it worked. This was how it always worked. Some ordinary thing, a phone call, a scent, a song on the radio, would reach inside him and drag out the thing he'd spent his entire adult life trying to bury. He dried his face, put on his boots, and walked outside to feed the horses. That was Ethan's answer to everything. Work. Move. Don't stop. Don't think. He was 48 years old, and he had lived this way since he was 23. The town of Willow Creek, Wyoming, had a population of 412 people. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody had an opinion about everybody. And everybody had exactly the same opinion about Ethan Caldwell. He was a good man, a hard man, a man you could depend on. But he was also the loneliest man any of them had ever seen. Frank Dawson, who ran the feed store, said it best. He told his wife one night, "Ethan Caldwell is the kind of man who'll drive 40 miles in a blizzard to pull your truck out of a ditch, but if you try to buy him a cup of coffee afterward, he'll disappear like smoke." That was true. Ethan helped people. He always had. When the Miller family lost their barn roof in the storm of 2014, Ethan showed up at 4 in the morning with lumber and nails and worked for 16 hours straight. When old Dorothy Hayes couldn't afford to fix her fence line, Ethan repaired it himself, 3 full miles of wire, and never sent a bill. But he never stayed. He never accepted a meal. He never sat down at anyone's table. He never let anyone close enough to say the words he feared most, "Thank you." Because gratitude required connection, and connection required openness, and openness required trust. And Ethan Caldwell had decided a long time ago that trust was just another word for giving someone the power to destroy you. So he worked. He ranched. He woke up before dawn and collapsed after dark. He ate alone. He slept alone. He lived alone. And if anyone asked him whether he was happy, he'd shrug and say, "I'm fine." He always said he was fine. He was never fine. The morning. Anna Whitmore arrived in Willow Creek. Ethan was repairing a gate on the south end of his property. He didn't know she was coming. He didn't care. Strangers passed through Willow Creek all the time, usually tourists heading to Yellowstone or photographers chasing scenery. They came. They took pictures. They left. None of them mattered. But Anna was different. He didn't know that yet. She pulled into town, driving a beat-up sedan with Illinois plates and a crack running diagonally across the windshield. She parked in front of the general store, walked in, and asked the woman behind the counter if there was a place to stay for a few weeks. Margaret Parsons, who had run the general store for 31 years and had never once minded her own business, looked at this young woman from Chicago with ink-stained fingers and tired eyes and said, "Honey, we don't have a hotel. We barely have a stoplight. What on earth are you doing here?" Anna smiled. It was a careful smile. The kind of smile people wear when they've learned the hard way that showing too much of yourself is dangerous. "I'm a journalist," she said. Or I was. I'm working on a project about vanishing ranch traditions in the American West. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Ranch traditions? Yes, ma'am. And you picked Willow Creek. I picked Willow Creek because somebody told me this is the last place in Wyoming where people still do things the old way. Margaret leaned forward on the counter. She studied Anna the way a woman of 70 years studies anyone under 40, with a mixture of suspicion and hope. Who told you that? A professor at the University of Wyoming. He said if I wanted the real story, I needed to talk to a man named Ethan Caldwell. Margaret's expression changed immediately. Something flickered across her face. Not quite concern, not quite sadness. Something deeper. Something that had accumulated over decades of watching a man she cared about slowly disappear inside himself. Ethan won't talk to you, Margaret said quietly. Why not? Because Ethan doesn't talk to anyone. Anna set her bag on the counter. Then I'll wait until he does. Margaret stared at her for a long moment. Then she laughed a short, disbelieving laugh and picked up the phone. Betty, she said into the receiver. Get the back room ready. We've got a woman from Chicago who thinks she's going to get Ethan Caldwell to open his mouth. It took Anna 4 days to meet Ethan. Not because she couldn't find him. Everyone in Willow Creek could tell her exactly where he was at any given hour. Ethan Caldwell was the most predictable man in the county. Dawn feeding horses. Morning checking fence lines. Afternoon working cattle. Evening sitting on his porch with a cup of black coffee staring at the mountains like he was waiting for them to tell him something. The problem wasn't finding him. The problem was that every time she drove out to his ranch, he saw her coming and simply walked away. The first time she pulled up to his gate and called out, Mr. Caldwell, I'm Anna Whitmore. I'm a journalist and I'd love to talk to you about... He turned around, walked into his barn, and closed the door. She waited for 20 minutes. He didn't come out. The second time she arrived earlier before dawn, hoping to catch him off guard. She found him by the water trough. She started to introduce herself. He looked at her car, and said one word, no. Then he walked away. The third time she tried a different approach. She didn't go to his ranch. She went to the community center where the ranchers met once a month to discuss water rights and land management. Ethan was there standing in the back, arms crossed, saying nothing. After the meeting, Anna approached him with her notebook closed and her recorder off. I'm not here to bother you, she said. I just want to understand how this life works. The traditions. The way people used to do things. Ethan looked at her. His eyes were gray, the flat gray of a river stone, and they gave away nothing. Then talk to someone else, he said. I have. They all say the same thing. They say you're the one who knows more about this land and this way of life than anyone else in the county. They're exaggerating. Frank Dawson says you rebuilt his entire fence system using techniques your grandfather taught you. Dorothy Hayes says you helped her husband break horses the same way they did it in the 1940s. Margaret at the store says, Margaret talks too much. Maybe. But she also says you're the most decent man she's ever known. Something moved in Ethan's face. Just a flicker. Like a fish breaking the surface of still water and disappearing again. He said nothing. He put on his hat. He walked to his truck. He drove away. But Anna noticed something. Right before he turned away, right in that half second between hearing Margaret's words and shutting down again, she saw it. Pain. Not anger. Not annoyance. Not even sadness. Pain. The raw, bleeding kind that never scabs over because the person carrying it won't let it heal. Anna stood in the parking lot and watched his truck disappear down the dirt road. She opened her notebook and wrote 3 words. He's still wounded. On the 4th day, everything changed. Anna didn't go looking for Ethan. Instead, she spent the morning interviewing the Henderson family, who ran a small sheep operation on the east side of the valley. The Hendersons were warm, talkative people. They fed her breakfast and told her stories about the old days, the roundups, the brandings, the barn dances, the way the whole community used to come together during calving season. But when she asked about Ethan Caldwell, the mood shifted. Tom Henderson, a big, soft-spoken man of 63, set down his coffee and looked at his wife. You're asking about Ethan, he said carefully. I am. You know what happened to him? I know he lost someone, a long time ago. Tom nodded slowly. Her name was Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. She was 22 years old. Ethan was 23. They were going to get married that spring. His wife Carol reached over and put her hand on his arm. Tom. No, she should know, Tom said. If she's going to understand anything about that man, she needs to know this. He looked at Anna directly. Sarah died in a car accident on Route 287, January 14th, middle of winter. Roads were icy. She was driving back from town. She'd gone to pick up fabric for her wedding dress. Something happened. The truck hit a patch of black ice and went off the road. Tom paused. He rubbed his face with both hands. Ethan was supposed to drive her. He'd promised to take her into town that morning. But a fence broke on the north pasture, and he told her he'd catch up later. He said he'd meet her at the store. He told her to go ahead. Anna felt something cold settle in her chest. He told her to go ahead, Tom repeated. Those were the last words he ever said to her. The kitchen was silent. Carol wiped her eyes. Tom stared at the table. After the funeral, Ethan went back to the ranch and didn't come out for 3 months. His father, old Jack Caldwell, he was still alive then. Hard man, the hardest man I've ever known. He told Ethan it was his fault, told him straight to his face. You should have been driving. You chose the ranch over her, and now she's gone. Anna's pen had stopped moving. She couldn't write. Tom, she said quietly, are you telling me Ethan's own father blamed him? I'm telling you his father broke something inside that boy that never got fixed. He leaned forward. Ethan Caldwell has spent 25 years punishing himself for a promise he didn't keep. He won't let anyone close. He won't let anyone love him. And he won't let himself believe he deserves anything good, because somewhere deep down inside, he still hears his father's voice telling him it was all his fault. Tom picked up his coffee, took a long sip and said, That's not a man who chose to be lonely. That's a man who was taught that loneliness was what he earned. Anna closed her notebook. She thanked the Hendersons. She drove back to her room behind the general store, sat on the edge of the bed and cried. Not for herself. For Ethan. For the 23-year-old boy who had been carrying a dead man's judgment for a quarter of a century. 2 days later, Anna was at the community barn, the old one on the edge of town that hadn't been used in years. The roof had partially collapsed. The doors hung sideways on rusted hinges. Inside, years of weather and neglect had turned it into a ruin. Anna had gotten permission from the town council to document the building. She was taking notes about its history. It had been built in 1938 by a group of ranchers who wanted a place where the whole community could gather when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around. Ethan was standing in the doorway. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the barn. His jaw was tight. His hands were at his sides. This building, he said, and his voice was low, rough, almost cracked. My grandfather helped build this building. Anna didn't move. She didn't speak. She had spent enough time around guarded people to know that the worst thing she could do right now was push. Ethan took a step inside. He ran his hand along one of the support beams. He looked up at the broken roof. He used to bring me here when I was a kid, every Sunday. The whole town came. Families, kids, old people, everyone. He paused. That was before everything went wrong. Anna stayed still. She barely breathed. Ethan looked at her. For the first time, he didn't look guarded. He looked tired. The kind of tired that sleep can't fix. You want to know about ranch traditions, he said. It wasn't a question. I do. Then start here. He tapped the beam. This barn is the most important tradition this town ever had. It's where people came to remember they weren't alone. His voice broke on the last word. Just barely. Just enough for Anna to hear it. She nodded. Will you help me document it? Ethan stared at her for a long time. Something was happening behind those gray eyes. A war. A calculation. 25 years of walls meeting one moment of exhaustion. I don't do interviews, he said. I'm not asking for an interview. I'm asking for your help. He turned back to the beam. He pressed his palm flat against the wood as if he could feel his grandfather's hands still holding it. "Monday," he said. "I'll be here Monday at 6. Then he walked out. Anna leaned against the wall and let out a long breath. Her heart was pounding. She didn't know it yet, but that single word Monday was the first crack in a wall that had taken Ethan Caldwell 25 years to build. Monday came. Ethan arrived at 5:45 a.m. He brought tools. He didn't bring conversation. For the first 2 hours he worked in silence, reinforcing beams, pulling out rotten boards, assessing damage. Anna worked alongside him, handing him tools when he pointed, holding boards when he measured. She didn't ask questions. She didn't push. She let the work speak. At 8 o'clock, Ethan stopped. He sat down on an overturned crate, pulled a thermos from his bag, poured black coffee into a tin cup, and took a long drink. Then, without looking at her, he said, "You're not what I expected." Anna sat down across from him. "What did you expect? Someone who talks too much, asks too many questions, wants the story before they earn it. And instead you showed up and hauled lumber for 2 hours without saying a word." Anna almost smiled. "I grew up on my grandfather's farm in downstate Illinois. He had a rule: you don't talk until the work is done." For the first time, the very first time, Ethan looked at her without suspicion. "Smart man," he said. "I was. He passed 4 years ago. Lung cancer. He was 79. Ethan nodded. The nod wasn't casual. It was the nod of a man who understood loss, who recognized it in someone else, the way you recognize a scar that matches your own. "I'm sorry," he said. And he meant it. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Ethan poured a second cup of coffee and handed it to her. Anna took it. She wrapped her hands around the warm tin. She looked at him over the rim. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Depends. The people in this town, they all talk about you like you're some kind of ghost, like you're here, but not really here, like you're doing things for people, but you won't let them see you doing them." Ethan's face tightened. "Frank told me you fixed his irrigation system last spring. You did it at night so he wouldn't know it was you. Frank's system was leaking. It was going to flood his south field. You could have told him. Then he would have felt obligated. Obligated to what? To thank me, to invite me over, to—" He stopped. He looked away. "To act like we're something we're not." "What's that?" "Close." The word came out like a door slamming shut. Anna set down her coffee. She looked at him steadily. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. "Ethan," she said, "why won't you let people thank you?" He stood up. He picked up a hammer. He walked back to the beam he'd been working on. "Because I don't deserve it," he said quietly. He drove a nail into the wood with one hard strike. Anna watched him. She didn't write anything down. She didn't reach for her notebook. She just watched. And she understood. This wasn't arrogance. This wasn't pride. This was a man who had been told by his own father, by his own guilt, by 25 years of solitary punishment, that he didn't deserve kindness, that he didn't deserve connection, that the price of one mistake was a lifetime of exile. She stood up and walked over to where he was working. "Ethan?" He didn't turn around. "Ethan, look at me." He stopped hammering, but he didn't turn. "I know about Sarah," she said. His whole body went rigid. The hammer froze in midair. His shoulders locked. His breathing stopped. The silence lasted 10 seconds. 20. 30. Then he turned around. His face was different. The guard was gone. The mask was gone. What was underneath was raw, exposed, the face of a man who had been hiding for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. "Who told you?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. "Tom Henderson." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Tom had no right. He told me because he cares about you. He told you because people in this town can't keep their mouths shut. He told me because he's watched you destroy yourself for 25 years and he doesn't know how to stop it." Ethan threw the hammer. It hit the far wall and clattered to the floor. He turned away from her. He put both hands on the beam and leaned into it, his head bowed, his arms shaking. "You don't know anything about me," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't know what I did. You don't know what I didn't do. You come here from your city with your notebook and your questions, and you think you can just dig into someone's life like it's a story you're writing. That's not what I'm doing." "Then what are you doing?" "I'm standing in front of a man who hasn't forgiven himself for something that was never his fault." Ethan spun around. His eyes were red. His voice cracked. "It was my fault. I was supposed to drive her. I promised her I would drive her. And I chose the ranch. I chose a broken fence over the woman I loved, and she died on that road alone." His voice broke on the word alone. He pressed his back against the beam and slid down until he was sitting on the floor. He pulled his knees up. He put his head in his hands. Anna knelt beside him. She didn't touch him. She didn't try to comfort him with empty words. She just knelt there close enough that he could feel her presence, far enough that he didn't feel trapped. "Ethan," she said softly, "you didn't kill Sarah. A patch of ice on a road killed Sarah. A winter storm killed Sarah. You told her to go ahead, the same thing any rancher would say when there's work to be done. You didn't choose the ranch over her. You chose to do your job and meet her later. There was no way to know. My father knew. Your father was grieving. People say terrible things when they're in pain. He wasn't wrong. I was completely wrong. And the fact that you've spent 25 years believing him, that's the real tragedy, Ethan. Not Sarah's death. That was a tragedy. But you being alive and refusing to live, that's the tragedy that's still happening." Ethan looked up. His eyes were wet. His face was the face of a man who had heard his own sentence spoken aloud for the first time and realized it might not be true. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I understand more than you think." He shook his head. "Nobody understands." Anna sat down next to him. She pulled her knees up, mirroring his position. She stared straight ahead. "When I was 28, she said, I was a journalist at one of the biggest newspapers in Chicago. I had worked my way up from nothing. I was good at my job. I believed in what I was doing. Then my editor, a man I trusted, a man I considered a mentor, he took my investigation, a story I'd worked on for 2 years. He gave it to someone else. He put his name on the background work. He told the publisher I was unstable. And when I tried to fight it, he had me fired." She paused. "I lost my career. I lost my reputation. I lost every friend I had in that newsroom because they were all too afraid to stand up for me. And I spent 2 years afterward convinced that it was my fault, that I must have done something wrong, that I must have deserved it." She turned to look at him. "Sound familiar?" Ethan stared at her. Something shifted in his expression. "Not much, but enough. I came out here because I was running," she said. "I told myself I was chasing a story, but the truth is, I was running from the fact that the life I built in Chicago burned to the ground, and I didn't know how to start over." She let that sit between them. "So when I say I understand what it feels like to believe you deserve your own pain, I'm not guessing, Ethan. I'm remembering." The barn was quiet. The only sound was the wind pressing against the walls. Ethan turned his head slowly and looked at her. Really looked at her. Not with suspicion. Not with anger. Not with the flat gray guard he showed the rest of the world. He looked at her with recognition. "You're running too," he said. "I was. I'm trying to stop." He nodded, slowly, like a man testing the weight of a new idea. "It's hard to stop," he said. "I know. I've been running for 25 years. I know that too." He leaned his head back against the beam. He closed his eyes. "She was wearing a blue dress," he said. "The morning she left. She was wearing a blue dress, and she laughed at me because I had grease on my face from fixing the tractor. She wiped it off with her thumb and said, 'You're going to show up to our wedding looking like a mechanic.' And I said, 'You'd marry me even if I showed up covered in mud.' And she said, 'I'd marry you if you showed up covered in anything.'" His voice cracked again. "That was the last conversation we ever had. The last time I heard her laugh. The last time anyone touched my face." Anna felt tears running down her own cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. 25 years, Ethan said. And I can still hear her laugh. I can still feel her thumb on my cheek. I can still smell the coffee she made that morning. I remember everything. Every single thing. And every single day I wake up, and the first thing I think is, I should have been driving. He opened his eyes. My father was right about one thing. I had one job. Protect the people I love. And I failed. Anna took a breath. She chose her next words carefully, not because she was a journalist choosing words for impact, but because she was a human being speaking to another human being who was drowning. Ethan, you didn't fail Sarah. You failed yourself. You took one terrible, random, unpreventable moment and you turned it into a life sentence. You became your own judge, your own jury, and your own warden. And the prison you built for yourself is this ranch, this silence, this loneliness. She turned to face him fully. You didn't protect your heart, Ethan. You buried it. And every year it stays buried, you lose a little more of the man Sarah actually loved. Because the man she loved wasn't this. The man she loved laughed. The man she loved had grease on his face, and plans for the future, and enough love in him to fill this whole valley. Ethan stared at her. Nobody had ever said this to him. In 25 years, nobody had ever sat with him and spoken the truth this plainly. People had pitied him. People had whispered about him. People had given him space and called it respect. But nobody, not one single person, had looked him in the eye and told him that his grief had become a cage. Who are you? He whispered. Anna almost laughed. Almost. I'm somebody who recognizes a prison when she sees one, she said, because I just walked out of my own. They sat in that barn for another hour. Neither of them spoke much. Ethan drank his coffee. Anna stared at the beams. The wind howled outside, but inside something had shifted. Not healed, not fixed, not resolved, but shifted. Like a bone that had been set wrong for years, and someone had finally put pressure in the right place. It hurt. God, it hurt. But for the first time it was pointing in the right direction. When Ethan finally stood up, he picked up the hammer from where he'd thrown it. He looked at it. He looked at the wall. He looked at Anna. Same time tomorrow, he said. Anna nodded. He walked to the door. He stopped. He didn't turn around. Anna. Yeah. Thank you for not pretending it doesn't hurt. He walked out into the cold. Anna sat alone in the barn. She put her face in her hands. She breathed. She let the weight of what had just happened settle into her. She had come to Willow Creek to write a story about vanishing traditions. She had found something else entirely. She had found a man who had been disappearing slowly, quietly, completely for 25 years. A man who had turned guilt into a lifestyle and loneliness into a religion. A man who helped everyone and allowed no one to help him. And she had found something else too. Something she wasn't ready to name yet. Something that scared her more than anything she'd left behind in Chicago. She reached for her notebook. She opened it. She stared at the blank page. Then she wrote one line. He's still in there. Buried, but still in there. She closed the notebook. Outside, she heard Ethan's truck start and pull away. And for the first time in months, Anna Whitmore felt something she hadn't expected to feel in this small, forgotten town in the middle of Wyoming. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next morning, Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He woke up before his alarm. Not because of the ranch, not because of the horses, not because of work. He woke up because his mind was already running, cycling through everything Anna had said in the barn, every word, every pause, every silence. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and he heard her voice like it was still in the room. You didn't protect your heart. You buried it. He got up. He made coffee. He stood at the window. For 25 years, this routine had been his armor. Wake up. Coffee. Work. Don't think. Don't feel. Don't stop. Every day the same. Every night the same. Every year the same. But this morning, the armor didn't fit. Something had cracked. Something small. Something so small, he couldn't even identify what it was. But it was there, a hairline fracture in the wall he'd spent half his life building, and he couldn't ignore it. He picked up the phone. He called Frank Dawson. Frank answered on the second ring. Ethan. And everything okay? Fine. I need lumber. More than I've got. For what? The community barn. I'm fixing it up. Silence. A long silence. You're fixing the barn, Frank said. That's what I said. The barn nobody's used in 15 years. I know how long it's been, Frank. Ethan, why are you going to sell me lumber or not? Frank paused. Then, I'll bring it out myself, tomorrow morning. You don't need to do that. I know I don't need to. I want to. Ethan gripped the phone. His instinct, the same instinct that had governed every interaction he'd had for 25 years, screamed at him to refuse. To say no. To push Frank away before the conversation turned into something resembling friendship. But Anna's voice was in his head again. Why won't you let people thank you? And his own answer, the one that had come out before he could stop it. Because I don't deserve it. He closed his eyes. Fine, he said. Bring it out tomorrow. Ethan. What? It's good to hear your voice, son. Ethan hung up the phone. He stood in his kitchen alone and felt something he hadn't felt in so long that he almost didn't recognize it. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. Not even close. It was possibility. And that terrified him more than the loneliness ever had. Frank Dawson showed up the next morning with enough lumber to rebuild half the barn. He brought Jake and 2 other ranchers, Bill Torres and Pete Garland, men who had known Ethan since they were boys, and who hadn't received more than a nod from him in over a decade. Ethan was already inside the barn when they arrived. He heard the trucks. He heard the doors slam. He heard the voices. His first instinct was to leave. His body actually turned toward the back door, toward escape, toward silence, toward the same retreat he'd perfected over 25 years. But his boots didn't move. He stood there gripping a 2x4 and he forced himself to stay. Frank walked in first. He stopped when he saw Ethan. The 2 men looked at each other. Frank had known Ethan since they were 18 years old. He'd been at Sarah's funeral. He'd watched Ethan disappear into himself year after year, and he'd never known what to say about it. Nobody did. Brought some help, Frank said carefully. Ethan looked past him at Jake, Bill, and Pete. 3 men standing in the doorway, unsure whether they were welcome. I didn't ask for help, Ethan said. I know you didn't. Frank. Ethan, shut up and hand me a hammer. For a moment, nobody moved. Pete looked at Bill. Jake looked at his father. Ethan stared at Frank with an expression that could have been anger or gratitude. It was impossible to tell because Ethan himself didn't know which one it was. Then he reached into his toolbox, pulled out a hammer, and tossed it to Frank. The east wall needs new framing, Ethan said. Start there. Frank caught the hammer and grinned. Not a big grin. A careful one. The kind of grin you give a wild animal that has just taken food from your hand for the first time. They worked. Anna arrived an hour later. She walked in carrying coffee and a box of muffins from Margaret's store. She stopped when she saw 4 men working alongside Ethan instead of Ethan working alone. She looked at Ethan. He was measuring a board, his back to the door. He hadn't seen her yet, but Frank had. Frank caught her eye and gave her a small nod, the kind of nod that said, I don't know what you did, but keep doing it. Anna set the coffee and muffins on a crate and started working without a word. She picked up a broom and began sweeping out debris. No announcement, no conversation, just work. Ethan noticed her 20 minutes later. He turned around to grab a nail gun and found her dragging a broken board toward the discard pile. Their eyes met. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. But something passed between them, an acknowledgement, an understanding. A silent agreement that whatever had happened in this barn 2 days ago was real, and neither of them was going to pretend it wasn't. They worked until noon. When they stopped, Frank pulled sandwiches from a cooler and handed them around. For the first time in anyone's memory, Ethan Caldwell sat down and ate a meal with other people. He didn't talk much. He answered questions with short sentences. He nodded when someone told a joke. He didn't laugh, but he was there, present, sitting in a circle of men he'd known his whole life, eating a sandwich, drinking water from a shared jug. Pete Garland, who had the subtlety of a freight train, said what everyone was thinking. "Ethan, I gotta say I've known you 40 years, and this is the first time I've seen you sit still long enough to chew." Bill elbowed him. Frank shot him a warning look. But Ethan surprised them all. 41 years, he said. "You miscounted." Pete blinked, then he laughed, and Frank laughed, and Bill laughed, and even Jake, who was 26 and had always been slightly terrified of Ethan, cracked a smile. Anna watched from across the circle. She was holding a sandwich she hadn't bitten into, and she was watching Ethan's face the way a doctor watches a patient's first steps after surgery. Carefully, hopefully, knowing it could still go either way. Ethan caught her watching him. He looked away quickly, but not before she saw it, a flicker of something in those gray eyes that hadn't been there before. Not happiness. Not yet. But the faintest, most fragile possibility of it. After lunch, the other men left. Frank squeezed Ethan's shoulder on the way out, a gesture so rare between these two men that Jake actually stopped walking and stared. "Same time Thursday," Frank said. Ethan hesitated. "You don't have to keep coming back." "I know I don't have to. I already told you that." Frank. "Thursday, Ethan, 6 a.m., and next time you're bringing the coffee." He walked out before Ethan could argue. Anna and Ethan were alone in the barn again. The silence between them was different now, not empty, not tense, but full. Like a room that had been cleaned out and was waiting for new furniture. "That was good," Anna said. Ethan picked up his tools. It was 4 men doing carpentry. Don't make it more than it was. "Ethan, you ate lunch with people. You made a joke. Pete Garland nearly fell off his crate. It wasn't that funny." "That's not the point, and you know it." He stopped packing his toolbox. He stood there with a wrench in his hand, staring at it like it held answers. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Do what?" "This." He gestured vaguely at the barn, at her, at the space where the other men had been sitting. "Whatever this is. I don't know the rules anymore. I don't know how to be around people without feeling like I'm doing it wrong." "There are no rules, Ethan. There are always rules. You just don't see them because they come naturally to you." Anna set down her broom. "You think connection comes naturally to me? Doesn't it?" She laughed, a real laugh, sharp and honest, and tinged with bitterness. "Ethan, I moved to a town where I knew nobody because the last time I trusted people, they destroyed my career. I haven't had a real friend in 2 years. I eat dinner alone every night. I talk to Margaret at the store because she's the only person who doesn't look at me like I'm a tourist attraction. Connection does not come naturally to me. I'm just better at faking it than you are." Ethan looked at her. "You're faking it. Every single day. You don't seem like you're faking it." "That's because I'm very, very good at it." Something changed in his face. The guardedness didn't exactly drop, it was more like it softened. Like a wall made of stone, realizing it could be a wall made of something else. Something that still stood, but let light through. "So we're both faking it," he said. "Apparently." "Then how do we stop?" Anna looked at him. The question caught her off guard. She had expected more resistance, more deflection, more of the armor he'd worn since the day she met him. Instead, he was standing in front of her, asking a genuine question, the kind of question a man only asks when he's reached the point where pretending has become more exhausting than the truth. "I don't know," she said, "but I think we just started." Ethan nodded. He put the wrench in the toolbox. He closed the lid. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to not write it down." Anna's hand instinctively moved toward her pocket where her notebook was. She stopped. She pulled her hand back. "I won't write it down. I mean it. Not in your notebook. Not in your project. Not anywhere. I promise." He took a breath. It was the breath of a man about to jump off a cliff and hoping there was water at the bottom. "After Sarah died, I went to her grave every day for a year. Every single day. I'd sit there and talk to her. I'd tell her about the ranch, about the horses, about the weather. I'd tell her everything I would have told her if she'd come home that day. And every day before I left, I'd say the same thing. I'll never love anyone else. I promise you that. I will never love anyone else as long as I live. He looked at Anna. I've kept that promise for 25 years. Anna felt the weight of those words land on her chest like a stone. Ethan, I'm not finished. She closed her mouth. I kept that promise because I believed it was the only way to make things right. If I suffered enough, if I gave up enough, if I punished myself enough, then maybe somehow it would balance out. Like the universe was keeping score, and my loneliness was the payment for what I did. His voice was steady. That was the frightening part. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't breaking down. He was reciting the terms of a contract he had signed with himself a quarter of a century ago, and he was delivering them with the flat conviction of a man who had never once questioned whether the contract was fair. But yesterday, he said, after you said what you said about burying my heart, I went home and I sat on my porch and I thought about Sarah. Not about the accident, not about the ice or the road or my father. I thought about her, about who she was, about what she would have wanted. He paused. And I realized something that made me sick to my stomach. What? Sarah would have hated this. She would have hated what I became. She would have looked at my life, this ranch, this silence, this emptiness, and she would have been furious with me. She was the happiest person I ever knew. She laughed at everything. She loved people. She loved noise and mess and chaos. And I turned my life into a monument to grief because I was too stubborn and too scared to do the one thing she would have begged me to do. Which was, live. The word hung between them. She would have told me to live, Ethan said. And I spent 25 years doing the opposite. I spent 25 years dying slowly and calling it loyalty. Anna's eyes were wet. She didn't bother hiding it. That's not loyalty, Ethan. I know that now. I didn't know it yesterday. What changed? He looked at her for a long moment. You did. Anna shook her head. I didn't do anything. You did the one thing nobody else ever did. You told me the truth. Not the polite truth. Not the, I'm sorry for your loss truth. You looked me in the face and told me I was burying myself alive. Nobody ever did that. Not Frank. Not Tom. Not Margaret. They all knew. They all watched. But nobody said it. Maybe they were afraid of hurting you. Maybe they were. But you weren't. I was terrified, Ethan. Good. That means it was real. They stood in the barn, this broken, beautiful barn that Ethan's grandfather had built with his own hands, and they looked at each other with the kind of honesty that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. I don't know what happens next, Ethan said. Neither do I. I'm not good at this. Neither am I. I might shut down again. I might go back to how I was. That's what I do. I open a door, and then I slam it shut because opening it hurts too much. Then I'll knock again. He stared at her. Why? Because that's what people do when they care about someone. They keep knocking. Ethan picked up his toolbox. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame, his back to her. Anna. Yeah. Nobody's knocked in a very long time. He walked out. Anna stood alone in the barn. She pressed her hand against the beam. The same beam Ethan had touched, the same beam his grandfather had raised, and she felt the roughness of the wood under her palm, and she thought about the man who had just walked out that door carrying 25 years of grief on his back, and for the first time wondering if he was allowed to set it down. She wasn't sure what was happening between them. She wasn't sure she wanted to name it. She knew only that something in her had responded to something in him, wound to wound, scar to scar, exile to exile, and that the connection was as frightening as it was undeniable. She picked up her notebook. She opened it to the page where she'd written, "He's still in there. Buried, but still in there." Underneath it she wrote, "So am I." Over the next 2 weeks, the barn project became something nobody expected. Word got around Willow Creek that Ethan Caldwell was rebuilding the community barn. At first, people didn't believe it. Ethan didn't do community projects. Ethan didn't do anything that required being in the same room as other human beings for more than 5 minutes. But Frank confirmed it. And Pete confirmed it. And soon, other people started showing up. Not because they were invited. Ethan never invited anyone, but because the barn meant something to this town. It was where their parents had danced, where their grandparents had celebrated harvests, where the community had come together before the slow erosion of time and economics scattered everyone to their own corners. Dorothy Hayes, who was 78 and had arthritis in both hands, brought lunch every day. She set it out on the old trestle table and rang a bell, and whoever was working would stop and eat. She never asked Ethan's permission. She just did it. The first time she rang that bell, Ethan looked at her with an expression that was half annoyance and half something he couldn't identify. "Dorothy, I didn't ask you to do this." "I know you didn't, sweetheart. That's why I'm doing it. I can feed myself." "Of course you can. But feeding yourself alone every day for 25 years isn't feeding yourself, Ethan. It's surviving. There's a difference." She handed him a plate. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. The same meal she used to make for her husband before he died. Ethan took the plate. He looked at it. He looked at Dorothy. His jaw worked. His eyes flickered. "Thank you," he said. Dorothy reached up and patted his cheek. "That's the first time you've said that to me since 1999. Don't make me wait another 27 years for the next one." She walked away. Ethan stood holding the plate, and for a moment, just one brief, unguarded moment, the corners of his mouth moved upward. It wasn't a smile. Not quite. But it was the closest thing to one that anyone in Willow Creek had seen from Ethan Caldwell since before Sarah died. Anna saw it from across the barn. She looked down at her plate so he wouldn't catch her watching. But she was smiling. A real one. The barn wasn't the only thing being rebuilt. Late one evening, after everyone else had gone home, Anna was organizing the old ranch records Ethan had brought in boxes from his property. These were the historical documents she needed for her Project Land Deeds branding records. Photographs, letters from Ethan's grandparents and great-grandparents dating back to the 1890s. She was sitting on the floor sorting through a box of photographs when she found it. A photograph of Ethan and Sarah. They were standing in front of the ranch house. Ethan was young, impossibly young, his face open and unguarded, and full of the kind of hope that only exists before life teaches you to be afraid of it. Sarah was beside him, her head tilted back in laughter, her hand on his chest. They were looking at each other, the way people look at each other, when they believe the future is something that happens to other people. Anna held the photograph carefully. She studied it. She studied young Ethan's face, the brightness in his eyes, the ease of his posture, the complete absence of the walls, and the silence, and the stone-gray guardedness that defined the man she knew now. She turned the photograph over. On the back in faded pencil, someone had written Ethan and Sarah, March 1999, 2 weeks before forever. 2 weeks before forever. They'd written that thinking forever meant a wedding, a life together, children, growing old. Instead, forever had meant something else entirely. Forever had meant grief and guilt, and a man standing alone at a grave, making promises that would imprison him for a quarter of a century. Anna put the photograph down. She pressed her palms against her eyes. She heard footsteps. She looked up. Ethan was standing over her. He saw the photograph. His face went white. "Where did you find that?" he said. "It was in the box, with the ranch records." He reached down and picked it up. He held it the way you hold something sacred, with both hands, with reverence, with terror. "I didn't know this was in there," he said. "I thought I'd put all of them away." All of them. All the photographs of her. I put them in a trunk in the attic after my father died. I couldn't look at them, but I couldn't throw them away either. He stared at the photograph. His thumb traced the edge of Sarah's face. "She was beautiful," Anna said softly. "She was everything." "Tell me about her. Not about the accident. About her." Ethan sat down on the floor. He held the photograph in his lap. "She hated mornings," he said. "She'd sleep until the last possible second, and then come running out of the house with her boots untied, shouting about how the horses were judging her for being late." He almost smiled. Almost. She couldn't cook. I mean, she was genuinely terrible. She burned water. She made a pot roast once that her own dog wouldn't eat. But she kept trying. Every Sunday she'd announce she was making dinner, and I'd find an excuse to fill up on bread before she served whatever disaster she'd created. Anna laughed. It was unexpected, a real surprised laugh, and Ethan looked at her with something that might have been wonder. Like he'd forgotten that talking about Sarah could produce a sound like that. She sang, he continued, constantly. She sang in the truck. She sang in the barn. She sang to the horses, and I swear they listened. She had a terrible voice, she knew it, she didn't care. She said music wasn't about being good, it was about being loud. She sounds amazing. She was. She was loud and messy and stubborn, and she argued with me about everything, and she was the most alive person I'd ever met. He stopped. The almost smile faded. And I let her drive alone on an icy road because I had a fence to fix. Ethan, I know what you're going to say. Do you? You're going to say it wasn't my fault. No, I'm going to say something different. He looked at her. I'm going to say that the man in this photograph, the one with the bright eyes and the grease on his face, he's not gone. He's not dead. He's sitting on this floor right now talking about the woman he loved, and for the first time in 25 years, he's remembering her with love instead of guilt. Ethan looked at the photograph. Then he looked at Anna. How do you do that? He said. Do what? Say the exact thing I need to hear. Maybe because I know what it sounds like when someone needs to hear it. Maybe because nobody said it to me when I needed it, so I learned to recognize the silence. Ethan set the photograph down between them. He stared at it. I want to put this up, he said. In the barn. In my house. On the mantle, where I can see it every day. Why? Because you're right. I've been remembering her with guilt. I've been turning her into a punishment. And she deserves better than that. She deserves to be remembered the way she was laughing, singing burning pot roasts, arguing with me about nothing. He picked up the photograph. She deserves to be remembered by someone who's still alive. Anna felt something break open in her chest. Not painfully. More like a door she hadn't known was locked, suddenly swinging wide. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard anyone say, she whispered. Ethan shook his head. It's not brave, it's 25 years late. It's never too late, Ethan. He looked at her. Really looked. And in that look, something shifted that couldn't be shifted back. Not a declaration. Not a confession. Just a recognition. Quiet, terrified, undeniable, that the woman sitting across from him on this dusty floor had become something more than a journalist, more than a helper, more than a friend. He didn't say it. He wasn't ready. He might never be ready. But he felt it. And for the first time in 25 years, he didn't try to bury it. 3 days later. Ethan's phone rang at 7 in the morning. He picked it up expecting Frank or maybe Dorothy asking what everyone wanted for lunch. It was Margaret Parsons. Ethan, you need to come into town. What's wrong? There's a man at the diner asking questions about your property. He's wearing a suit, Ethan. Nobody wears a suit in Willow Creek unless they're selling something or taking something. Who is he? He says his name is Richard Caldwell. Ethan's blood stopped. What did you just say? Richard Caldwell. He says he's your brother. Ethan gripped the phone so hard, the plastic creaked. I don't have a brother, Margaret. That's what I told him. He said you'd say that. Ethan stood in his kitchen. The walls felt like they were closing in. The name Richard Caldwell was a name he hadn't spoken in over 20 years. A name he had erased from his life, the same way he had erased everything else that caused him pain. Ethan, are you there? I'm here. What do you want me to do? Nothing. Don't do anything. I'm coming. He hung up the phone. He stood perfectly still for 30 seconds. Then he grabbed his keys and walked out the door. He drove into town at twice the speed limit. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles ached. His jaw was clenched. His breathing was shallow. Richard, his half-brother, the son his father had fathered with another woman during a 2-year affair that had nearly destroyed his parents' marriage. The boy who had shown up on their doorstep when Ethan was 15 years old, claiming a bloodline that Ethan's mother had spent years trying to deny. The boy Ethan's father had taken in, had welcomed, had trained, had given a place at the table, while Ethan's mother withered in humiliation and rage. The boy who after their father died had demanded half of the ranch. The boy Ethan had told in the coldest voice he'd ever used to leave Willow Creek and never come back. That was 22 years ago. Ethan pulled up to the diner. He saw the rental car immediately, a black sedan with Montana plates too clean and too new for this town. He walked inside. The diner was nearly empty. Margaret was behind the counter watching with the coiled intensity of a woman who had survived 70 years by knowing exactly when trouble was about to start. Richard was sitting in a booth by the window. He was 51 years old, 3 years older than Ethan. He had the same jaw, the same broad shoulders, the same Caldwell hands. But where Ethan was weathered and lean, Richard was polished. Clean-shaven, expensive watch, a suit that cost more than Ethan's truck. Richard looked up when Ethan walked in. He smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Hello, Ethan." Ethan didn't sit down. He stood at the edge of the booth and looked down at the man who shared his father's blood and nothing else. "What are you doing here?" "Sit down." "I'm not sitting down. I'm asking you a question." Richard leaned back. He picked up his coffee cup. He took a slow sip. "You haven't changed. Still standing in doorways. Still refusing to have a conversation like a normal human being. Last time we had a conversation, you threatened to sue me for half my land." "I didn't threaten. I suggested." "You had a lawyer." "I had options. You had stubbornness. Stubbornness won." "What do you want, Richard?" Richard set down his coffee. The smile dropped. Underneath it was something harder, something calculated. "Dad's land," he said. "I want what's mine. Nothing on that ranch is yours. Dad left no will, Ethan. We both know that. Which means legally I have a claim. You have nothing. You left. You walked away 22 years ago. I was pushed out. By you. You were trying to take half the ranch from the only family that actually worked it. I was trying to take what my father owed me. Your father owed you nothing. He gave you a roof. He gave you food. He gave you work. And you spat on all of it because it wasn't enough." Richard stood up. He was taller than Ethan. He used that height now, squaring his shoulders, closing the distance. "I'm not the same kid you threw off the property, Ethan. I've done well for myself. I have resources. I have lawyers. And I have a legitimate claim to half of that ranch. Then take me to court." "I don't want to take you to court." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to sell." The word hit Ethan like a fist. Sell. The ranch is in trouble, Ethan. Don't pretend it's not. I've seen the tax records. I've seen the cattle prices. I've seen the maintenance costs. You're bleeding money. You have been for years. How do you know my tax records? Public information. Anyone can look it up. You've been researching me. I've been protecting my interests. Ethan took one step closer. His voice dropped to a register that made Margaret grip the counter behind him. Your interests. Let me tell you about your interests, Richard. You showed up in our lives when I was 15 years old. My mother cried for a year, a full year. She couldn't look at Dad without seeing you, without seeing the proof that he'd betrayed her. And Dad? He felt so guilty about what he'd done that he bent over backward for you. He gave you everything. He taught you to ride. He taught you to rope. He gave you the attention he should have been giving his own wife and his own son. And when Mom died, when she died of a broken heart that you and Dad put there, you had the nerve to show up at the funeral and act like you belonged. Richard's face hardened. I did belong. He was my father too. He was your father by blood. He was my father by everything else. That's not how the law works. I don't care how the law works. I care about what's right. What's right is that I get what I'm owed. You're owed nothing from that ranch, nothing from this town, nothing from me. Richard picked up a folder from the booth. He opened it and placed a document on the table. I'm working with a development company, Granite Peak Properties. They're interested in the entire valley, your ranch, the Henderson place, the Garland property. They want to build a resort, luxury cabins, a golf course, the full package. Ethan stared at the document. He didn't touch it. You're working with developers. I'm working with people who understand that this land is worth more than cows and broken fences. This land is worth more than anything you could ever put on it. That's sentiment, Ethan, not business. Get out. Ethan, get out of this town. Get out of my life. And if you come near my ranch, I will make sure you regret it. Richard picked up the folder. He straightened his tie. He looked at Ethan with an expression that was half pity and half contempt. You can't hold on forever, Ethan. The world is changing. This town is dying, and you're going to lose that ranch whether I'm involved or not. The only question is whether you lose it smart or lose it stupid. He walked past Ethan. He stopped at the door. I'll be at the motel in Cody. When you're ready to talk like an adult, call me. He left. Ethan stood in the diner. He didn't move. His hands were shaking. His chest was tight. Margaret came around the counter and stood beside him. Ethan, honey, sit down. I'm fine. You're not fine. Sit down. He sat. He put his elbows on this table and his head in his hands. Margaret slid into the booth across from him. She waited. She had learned over decades of knowing this man that pushing him never worked. You had to wait. You had to let him come to it on his own. He's going to try to take it, Ethan said. His voice was muffled by his hands. He's going to try to take everything my family built. He can try. Trying and succeeding are two different things. He has lawyers, Margaret. He has money. He has a development company behind him. And you have a whole town that would go to war for you. Ethan looked up. Nobody's going to war for me. Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time she had touched him in years. He flinched, actually flinched at the contact. Ethan Caldwell, she said firmly, you have spent 25 years convincing yourself that you are alone in this world. You have worked yourself half to death, helping every person in this valley, and then you have turned around and told yourself that none of it mattered, that none of them care, that you don't deserve their loyalty. She squeezed his hand. You are wrong. You have been wrong for a very long time, and if that man thinks he can walk into this town and take your ranch, he is about to discover just how wrong you are. Ethan stared at her. His eyes were red. His jaw was trembling. Margaret, I don't know how to fight this. You don't have to know. That's what people are for. He pulled his hand away, not harshly, gently, like a man who wanted to hold on but had forgotten how. I need to talk to Anna, he said. Margaret's expression changed. Something softened in her old wise face. Yes, she said. You do. Ethan found Anna at the barn. She was cataloging photographs, her laptop open, her hair pulled back, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked up when he walked in and immediately knew something was wrong. What happened? He told her. Everything. Richard, the development company, the threat to the ranch, the history, the affair, the half-brother, the fracture in his family that had never healed. Anna listened without interrupting. When he finished, she closed her laptop. Ethan, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. Okay. Is the ranch really in financial trouble? He didn't answer right away. He walked to the beam that had become their place, the spot where every important conversation seemed to happen, and he leaned against it. Yeah, he said. It is. How bad? Bad enough that I've been selling cattle below market price just to keep up with taxes. Bad enough that I haven't repaired the north fence in 3 years because I can't afford the wire. Bad enough that... He stopped. Bad enough that Richard isn't wrong. The numbers are ugly. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because it's my problem. Ethan. It's my ranch, my family's ranch, my responsibility. And your brother showing up with developers and lawyers, that's your responsibility too. He's not my brother. Legally, he might be. Ethan turned to her. Whose side are you on? Yours. Which is exactly why I'm telling you the truth instead of what you want to hear. He stared at her. She stared back. Neither of them blinked. You need help, Anna said. Real help, legal help, financial help, community help. You cannot fight a development company alone. I've been alone my whole life. And look where it got you. The words hit him hard. She could see it, the impact, the recoil, the flash of anger followed by the deeper flash of recognition. That was harsh, he said. It was true. You keep doing that, saying true things that hurt. Would you rather I lied? Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes I'd rather you lied. Too bad. I'm a terrible liar. It's why I got fired from journalism. Despite everything, despite the fear and the anger and the weight of what had just happened, Ethan almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. Anna, I don't know what to do. Then let's figure it out together. He looked at her. Together. The word sat between them like a live wire. I don't do together, he said. You did today. You told me the truth. That's together. He ran his hand over his face. He was exhausted. Not physically. Physically, he could work another 12 hours without stopping. But emotionally, he was running on fumes. The conversation with Richard had torn open something he'd spent 2 decades sealing shut, and now it was bleeding alongside all the other wounds Anna had already exposed. There's something else, he said. What? Richard said something before he left. He said the town is dying. He said I'm going to lose the ranch whether he's involved or not. Do you believe that? I believe this valley is changing. I believe the young people are leaving. I believe the old families are struggling. And I believe that men like Richard, men with money and no conscience, will always find a way to take what isn't theirs. Then we don't let him. How? Anna picked up her phone. I'm a journalist, Ethan, or I was. And the one thing I learned in 10 years of investigative work is that men in expensive suits always have something to hide. You want to investigate him? I want to find out exactly who Granite Peak Properties is, what they've done before, and whether their deal is as clean as Richard wants you to believe. Ethan looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had driven her career in Chicago, the same fire that her editor had tried to extinguish and failed. You'd do that, he said. For me. For you. For this town. For every family in this valley that doesn't know what's coming. He was quiet for a long time. The barn creaked around them. Outside, the wind carried the sound of a truck passing on the distant highway. Okay, he said. Okay. Okay. Together. Anna nodded. She opened her laptop. Her fingers were already moving across the keyboard. Ethan watched her for a moment. Then he said something so quietly she almost missed it. Anna. Yeah. I don't know what I'd do if you hadn't come to Willow Creek. She looked up. Their eyes met. The air between them was charged thick with everything they weren't saying, everything they weren't ready to say, everything that was building between them like a storm that neither of them could stop. You'd be fixing this barn alone, she said. I'd be fixing a lot of things alone. She held his gaze for one more second. Then she looked back at her screen. Not anymore, she said. Ethan stood there. He felt something rising in his chest, something warm and terrifying and completely foreign, something he had promised a dead woman he would never feel again. He turned away before Anna could see his face, because Ethan Caldwell, the man who had buried his heart 25 years ago and sworn it would never beat for anyone again, had just felt it move, and he had no idea what to do about it. Anna spent the next 72 hours doing what she had been trained to do, digging. She barely slept. She ate at her desk. She made phone calls to contacts she hadn't spoken to in 2 years, former colleagues, investigative reporters, a legal analyst she'd once dated briefly in Chicago, who still owed her a favor. What she found about Granite Peak Properties made her stomach turn. She called Ethan at 6 in the morning on a Thursday. He answered on the first ring. I need you to come to the barn, she said. Now. What did you find? Come to the barn, Ethan. He was there in 15 minutes. Anna had papers spread across the old trestle table, printouts, property records, court filings, news articles. She was pacing when he walked in. She stopped and looked at him with the expression of a woman who had just pulled back a curtain and found something ugly on the other side. Granite Peak Properties has done this before, she said. 3 times, 3 different towns in Montana and Idaho. Small communities, struggling ranches, every single time the same pattern. What pattern? They find a valley with undervalued land. They send someone in, someone with a local connection, someone who has a reason to be there. That person starts pressuring landowners to sell. They offer below-market prices. They use financial pressure, tax liens, debt collection. And when people resist, they manipulate property records. Ethan's jaw tightened. Manipulate how? In Garrison, Montana, they filed duplicate liens on 3 ranches' liens that didn't exist. The owners didn't find out until they tried to refinance and discovered their titles were clouded. By the time the legal mess was sorted out, 2 of the 3 families had already sold because they couldn't afford the legal fees. That's fraud. It's technically a gray area. The liens were filed through shell companies. By the time anyone traced them back to Granite Peak, the development was already underway. The families that sold had signed away their right to sue. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down. He picked up one of the printouts and scanned it. His hands were steady, but Anna could see the muscle in his jaw working, grinding back and forth like a man chewing on rage. "And Richard is working with these people," he said. "Richard isn't just working with them. He's their point of entry. He's the local connection. He's the Caldwell name that gives them legitimacy. He's using our name to steal our land. He's using your name to steal everyone's land." Ethan set the paper down. He pressed his palms flat on the table and leaned forward. "Who else knows about this?" "Nobody, just us." "Then we need to tell people. We need to do more than tell people, Ethan. We need proof that they're planning the same thing here. What happened in Montana is damning, but it's not Willow Creek. Richard's lawyers will say it's a different company, a different deal, a different situation. So what do we need? We need to find out if they've already started. If they've filed anything on your property or anyone else's property without authorization. And we need to find out what Richard promised them." Ethan stood up. He walked to the beam. He put his hand on it, the same unconscious gesture he always made when he needed to feel the weight of something solid. "I'll go to the county office," he said. "I'll pull my records. I'll pull the Henderson records and the Garland records. Pete gave me authorization last week when I was documenting property histories." "Anna." "Yeah. If this is real, if they've already filed on my land, I need you to understand something." "What?" "That ranch is the only thing I have left. It's the only thing my family built that still exists. If I lose it..." He stopped. His voice caught. "If I lose it, then everything I gave up was for nothing. Every year I spent alone. Every person I pushed away. Every piece of myself I buried. It was all for that ranch. And if it's gone, then I am too." Anna walked to where he was standing. She stood close enough to touch him, but didn't. "You are not that ranch, Ethan." "Yes, I am." "No. You are a man who has spent 25 years confusing himself with a piece of land because the land couldn't leave him the way people could. But the ranch is not you, and losing it, if it ever came to that, would not erase you. You don't know that. I know you. I've known you for 3 weeks, and I know you better than people who've known you for decades. You are not your property. You are not your guilt. You are not your father's judgment. You are the man who rebuilt this barn, the man who fixed Frank's fences in the dark, the man who sat on this floor and told me about a woman in a blue dress who burned pot roasts and sang to horses. That man exists whether the ranch does or not." Ethan looked at her. His eyes were wet, but fierce. The eyes of a man caught between the person he'd been and the person he was terrified of becoming. "You really believe that?" he said. "I really believe that." "Why?" "Because someone had to." They went to the county records office that afternoon. Anna drove. Ethan sat in the passenger seat and stared through the windshield without speaking. His silence was different now, not the impenetrable wall she'd encountered when they first met, but the focused quiet of a man preparing for a fight he hadn't expected and couldn't afford to lose. The county clerk was a young woman named Jenny Walsh, who recognized Ethan immediately. Everyone in the county knew Ethan Caldwell. She pulled his property records without question and spread them on the counter. Anna leaned in. She scanned the documents with the practiced eye of a woman who had spent years reading legal filings for hidden threads. She found it on the 3rd page. "Ethan." He looked where she was pointing. There it was. A lien filed against his property 6 weeks ago by a company called Ridgeline Capital LLC. Ethan had never heard of Ridgeline Capital. He had never authorized any lien. He had never borrowed money from anyone, Ever he would rather have starved than take a loan. "This isn't mine," he said. His voice was flat, controlled, dangerous. Jenny leaned over the counter. "Mr. Caldwell, that was filed electronically. We received it from a registered filing agent in Billings. I didn't authorize this. The authorization signature is on file. I can pull it up." She pulled it up. Ethan looked at the signature. It was his name, Ethan James Caldwell, in a handwriting that was close to his, but not quite right. The J was wrong. Ethan's J had a sharp hook at the bottom, a habit from his mother's insistence on proper penmanship. This J was rounded, smooth, written by someone who had studied his signature but didn't know its history. "That's forged," Ethan said. Jenny went pale. "Are you sure? That is not my signature. I have never signed this document. I have never heard of Ridgeline Capital, and I have never authorized anyone to file anything against my property." Anna was already on her phone. She typed the name Ridgeline Capital LLC into 3 different databases. The results came back in minutes. "Ridgeline Capital LLC," she said quietly. "Incorporated in Delaware. Registered agent Pacific Filing Services. No physical office. No employees. No website." She looked at Ethan. "It's a shell company. Connected to Granite Peak. I can't prove it yet, but the filing agent Pacific Filing Services handled the incorporation paperwork for 2 of Granite Peak's subsidiaries in Montana." Ethan turned back to Jenny. "I want this lien removed. Mr. Caldwell, I can't just remove a filed lien. You'll need to file a dispute. There's a process." "How long does the process take?" 60 to 90 days. 60 to 90 days. He said it like a man counting the seconds on a bomb. "In 60 to 90 days I could lose my ranch." "Ethan." Anna put her hand on his arm. He looked down at her hand. He didn't pull away. "We'll fight this. But we need to be smart. If we file a dispute and Granite Peak finds out we're onto them, they'll cover their tracks. We need to gather everything first." "Everything like what?" "Like checking whether they've done the same thing to the Hendersons, to Pete, to every rancher in the valley." Ethan stared at her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She could see it land, see the impact ripple through his body. "This isn't just about me," he said. "No, it never was." They spent the next week pulling records for every ranch in the Willow Creek Valley. Anna worked 18-hour days, cross-referencing filings, tracing shell companies, building a paper trail that connected Ridgeline Capital to Granite Peak Properties through 3 layers of corporate obscurity. What she found was worse than she expected. Fraudulent liens had been filed against 4 properties: Ethan's ranch, the Henderson place, Pete Garland's land, and a small operation owned by an elderly widow named Ruth Massey, who hadn't checked her property records in years and had no idea anything was wrong. All 4 liens had been filed within the same 2-week period. All 4 used forged signatures. All 4 were processed by the same filing agent in Billings. Anna presented her findings to Ethan in the barn on a rainy Tuesday evening. He listened in silence. When she finished, he stood up and walked to the door. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To find Richard." "Ethan, no. He forged my signature. He filed fraudulent documents against my neighbors. He's trying to steal land from a 70-year-old widow who can barely, and if you go to him now, angry with no legal protection, he will use it against you. He'll say you threatened him. He'll file a restraining order. He'll make you the aggressor and himself the victim." Ethan stopped. His fists were clenched at his sides. Every muscle in his body was tight with the effort of restraint. "Then what do I do?" "You do what's harder. You let me finish the investigation. You let me build a case that's airtight. And then you don't go to Richard, you go to the state attorney general. That could take months. It could take weeks if we do it right. And in the meantime, what happens to Ruth Massey? What happens to Pete? What happens when Granite Peak starts pressuring people to sell? We tell them. We tell everyone. We call a meeting. We show them what's happening, and we give them the tools to protect themselves." Ethan turned around. He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not grief, not the flat guardedness he'd worn like a mask for 25 years. It was something raw and urgent and alive. "You would do all of this," he said. "You would spend weeks fighting a legal battle for a town you've known for less than a month." "Yes." "Why?" Anna stood up. She walked toward him. She stopped 2 feet away and looked up into his face. "Because 25 years ago someone told you it was your fault, and you believed them, and you spent your whole life punishing yourself for something that was never true. And now someone is trying to take the one thing you have left, and I'll be damned if I'm going to stand here and watch another lie destroy you." The air between them was electric. Ethan felt it in his chest, in his throat, in his hands. He felt it in the place where he had buried every feeling, every want, every human need for connection that he had denied himself since the day Sarah died. He wanted to reach for her. He wanted to close the distance between them and hold on to something real, something warm and alive and present. He wanted to break the promise he'd made at a graveside 25 years ago. But he didn't. Not because he was afraid of losing her, because he was afraid of what it meant that he wanted to. "Anna," he said. His voice was barely audible. "I need to tell you something." "Okay." "I've been dreaming about Sarah. Every night since we talked in this barn. But the dreams are different now. Before I used to dream about the accident, the road, the ice, her truck going off the edge. I'd wake up sweating, reaching for the phone, trying to call her. Every night for 25 years. He paused. "But this week the dreams changed. I dream about her laughing. I dream about her singing in the truck. I dream about the blue dress and the coffee and the grease on my face. And when I wake up, I'm not reaching for the phone. I'm just lying there, remembering. And it doesn't hurt the same way. It still hurts. But it's different. Like the pain is finally moving instead of sitting in one place." Anna felt tears on her cheeks. She didn't wipe them. "That's healing, Ethan." "Is that what it feels like?" "Yeah, that's what it feels like." He looked at her, and then he said the thing he'd been holding back. The thing that had been building inside him since the day she knelt beside him on this floor and told him the truth about his own heart. "I'm feeling things I promised myself I'd never feel again." Anna's breath caught. She held his gaze. She didn't look away. She didn't deflect. She didn't make it easier for either of them. "So am I," she said. The words hung between them, fragile, enormous, terrifying. Two people who had built their entire identities around the certainty that they were safer alone, standing 2 feet apart, admitting that the walls they'd built were no longer strong enough to hold. Ethan closed his eyes. He took a breath. He opened them. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I know. I might ruin it." "You might." "Aren't you supposed to say something reassuring?" "I'm supposed to say the truth. And the truth is that you might ruin it. And I might ruin it. And it might fall apart." But Ethan not trying. Staying in that prison you built for yourself. That's the only thing that's guaranteed to fail. A crack of thunder shook the barn. The storm that had been building all evening broke open, and the sound of rain hammered against the roof like 1,000 fists. Ethan looked up at the ceiling he'd repaired with his own hands, the ceiling his grandfather had raised, the ceiling that had sheltered a community that was now counting on him to protect them. "When this is over," he said slowly, "when Richard is gone, and the ranch is safe, and the town is okay, I need to tell you something. Something I'm not ready to say yet, but I need you to know it's there." Anna nodded. "I'll wait." "You shouldn't have to. That's not your decision to make." He looked at her one more time. Then he picked up his hat, put it on, and walked out into the storm. Anna stood in the barn alone. The rain roared around her. She put both hands on the beam and pressed her forehead against the wood. She was falling in love with Ethan Caldwell. She knew it. She'd known it for days. Maybe longer. Maybe since the moment he sat on this floor and told her about a girl in a blue dress who couldn't cook, and sang with a terrible voice, and was the most alive person he'd ever known. She was falling in love with a man who was still in love with a ghost. And the ghost wasn't Sarah. The ghost was the version of himself that Ethan had killed the day he decided he didn't deserve to live. The 23-year-old boy with bright eyes and grease on his face. The boy who believed in forever. That boy had died the same day Sarah did. and the man who replaced him had spent 25 years pretending that survival was the same thing as life. Anna picked up her laptop. She opened the Granite Peak file. She had work to do. She had a town to protect. She had a fight to win. But underneath the focus, underneath the determination, underneath the journalist's fire that had never really gone out underneath all of it, her heart was hammering with something she hadn't felt since before Chicago burned her down. Hope. The most dangerous feeling in the world. And she let herself feel it anyway. The town meeting happened on a Saturday morning. Anna had spent 3 days preparing. She printed every document organized, every filing traced, every shell company connection into a timeline that even the least legally minded rancher in Willow Creek could follow. Ethan had called every family in the valley personally, something that, according to Margaret, was the most phone calls he'd made in a single week since 1998. 37 people showed up. In a town of 412 that was nearly every landowner in the valley. They packed into the community barn, the same barn Ethan had been rebuilding, and they sat on folding chairs and hay bales and overturned crates, and they looked at Ethan Caldwell standing in front of them, and they waited. Ethan had never spoken to a group in his life. He had spent 25 years avoiding exactly this, the exposure, the vulnerability, the feeling of standing in front of people who could see him. His hands were shaking. He gripped the edge of the table to stop them. "Most of you know me," he said. His voice was rough, unpolished. "Most of you know I'm not a man who talks much, so I'm going to keep this short and let Anna explain the details." He paused. He looked at the faces staring back at him. Frank, Pete, Dorothy, Tom Henderson, Ruth Massey in her wheelchair, Margaret standing by the door with her arms crossed. "Someone is trying to take our land," he said. "Not just my land, yours, all of yours. And they're doing it by lying, forging documents, and counting on the fact that we're too small and too scattered and too stubborn to fight back." He stepped aside. Anna took his place. She laid it out. Every piece. Granite Peak properties. The shell companies. The fraudulent liens. The pattern from Montana and Idaho. The forged signatures. Richard Caldwell's involvement. When she said Richard's name, the room went silent. Everyone knew the story, or some version of it. The affair. The half-brother. The fracture. Small towns forget nothing and forgive slowly. Tom Henderson was the first to speak. "You're telling me there's a fake lien on my property right now?" "Yes," Anna said. "Filed 6 weeks ago through a company called Ridgeline Capital. Your signature was forged." Tom's face went red. He turned to his wife Carol, who grabbed his arm. "That's my land," Tom said. His voice cracked. "My father's land. My grandfather cleared that land with a mule and a handplow." Pete Garland stood up. "Mine too. They filed on mine too." "Yes. Those sons of—" "Pete." Ethan's voice cut through the room. Calm, steady. The voice of a man who had swallowed his own rage 3 days ago and was now holding it in place with everything he had. Let her finish. Anna continued. She explained the legal options, the dispute process, the state attorney general's office, the timeline. She explained what Granite Peak had done in other towns, how they'd pressured, manipulated, and ultimately displaced families who had worked their land for generations. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long time. Ruth Massey, who was 78 years old and weighed 90 pounds and had buried 2 husbands and raised 4 children on a ranch she'd run alone for 15 years, raised her hand. "Yes, ma'am," Anna said. "This man, Richard, he's Ethan's blood." Anna looked at Ethan. He nodded. "Half-brother," Ethan said. "Same father, different mother." Ruth looked at him with eyes that had seen every kind of betrayal the world had to offer and had stopped being surprised by any of them. "And he's doing this to you," she said. "His own family. He doesn't consider me family." "Do you consider him family?" Ethan didn't answer. Ruth wheeled herself forward. "I've known you since you were born, Ethan Caldwell. I held you the day your mother brought you home from the hospital. And I've watched you carry the weight of this valley on your back for 25 years without ever asking for a single thing in return." She reached up and took his hand. "You listen to me. Whatever happened between you and your brother, whatever your father did, whatever pain that family caused, none of it changes who you are. And who you are is the man who fixed my roof last winter when I couldn't afford to pay for it. The man who drove my granddaughter to the hospital when she broke her arm because I couldn't see well enough to drive at night. The man who has given everything to this valley and taken nothing back." Her grip tightened. "We're not going to let them take your ranch. We're not going to let them take any of our ranches. And if that brother of yours thinks he can walk into this town and tear apart what our family's built, he is going to learn what happens when you come after people who have nothing left to lose." The room erupted. Not in chaos, in unity. Frank stood up and said he'd pay for a lawyer. Pete said he'd drive to the state capitol himself. Dorothy said she'd organize a phone chain. Tom Henderson said he'd mortgage his truck if that's what it took to fight. Ethan stood in the middle of it, overwhelmed. He had spent his entire adult life believing he was alone. He had built that belief into an identity, a lifestyle, a religion. And now 37 people were standing in a barn his grandfather built, telling him they would fight for him the way he had quietly fought for them, and the foundation of everything he believed about himself was cracking. He looked at Anna. She was standing by the table watching him, her eyes bright with tears. She wasn't trying to hide. She mouthed 2 words. "You see?" He did. For the first time he did. After the meeting, people lingered. They talked in small groups, made plans, exchanged phone numbers. Margaret brought coffee from the store. Dorothy produced sandwiches from somewhere. The woman seemed to generate food from thin air. Ethan stood outside the barn, alone, breathing. He needed a moment. The noise, the people, the emotion, it was more human contact than he'd experienced in years, and his nervous system was overloaded. Anna found him there 10 minutes later. "You okay?" she asked. "No." "Good. You shouldn't be. That's not comforting." "It's not supposed to be comforting. It's supposed to be honest." He looked at her. "Ruth Massey held my hand." "I saw." "Nobody's held my hand since Sarah." "I know. I didn't pull away." "I know that too." He ran his hand through his hair. "Something is happening to me, Anna. Something I can't control. I spent 25 years keeping everything in place. Every feeling, every need, every piece of me that could get hurt. I kept it locked down. And now it's all coming apart. The barn, the town meeting. Richard. You." He said her name differently than the other words. Softer, more carefully, like he was handling something fragile. "I don't know who I am anymore," he said. "Maybe that's the point." "What do you mean?" "Maybe the man you were for 25 years was never really you. Maybe he was just the prison guard. And now the guard is leaving, and the real Ethan Caldwell is finally walking out." He stared at her for a long time. "You know what terrifies me most," he said. "What?" "Not Richard. Not the ranch. Not losing the land." "Then what?" "You. You terrify me." Anna felt her breath catch. "Why?" "Because every time I'm near you, I feel things I swore I would never feel again. And every time I feel them, I hear my father's voice telling me I don't deserve them. And every time I hear his voice, I have to choose. Do I listen to him or do I listen to you? And for 25 years, I've listened to him. Every single time. I've chosen his voice over my own because his voice was louder and it hurt more, and I thought that meant it was true." He took a step closer to her. "But it's getting harder. Every day it's getting harder to hear him. Because your voice is getting louder. And your voice doesn't tell me I'm guilty. Your voice tells me I'm allowed to live. And that Anna, that is the most terrifying thing anyone has ever told me." Anna looked up at him. They were standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. Close enough that if either of them leaned forward even slightly, the distance between them would disappear. "Ethan," she said, "I need to tell you something." "Okay." "I got a call yesterday. From my old editor's competitor. A newspaper in Chicago. They want me to come back. They've offered me a position senior investigative reporter. Full salary. Full team. Everything I lost." The words hit Ethan like a bullet. She watched the impact, watched the hope drain from his face, watched the walls start to rebuild themselves in real time, brick by brick, the way they had been built before the way he knew how to build them fast and solid and impenetrable. "When?" he said. His voice was flat. "They want an answer by the end of the month." "Are you going?" "I don't know." "You should go." "Ethan, you should go. That is your career. That's your life. You didn't come here to save a ranch or fight a land developer or deal with a broken man who can't even hold someone's hand without having a panic attack. Stop it." "Stop what?" "Stop deciding what I should do. Stop pushing me away before I've even made a decision. Stop doing the thing you always do, the thing where you convince yourself that people leaving is inevitable, so you might as well make it happen faster." "I'm not." "You are. You're doing it right now. I tell you I got an offer, and instead of asking me how I feel about it, instead of asking me what I want, you immediately jump to, you should go. Because if you push me away first, you get to control it. You get to be the one who chose the loneliness instead of the one who got left behind." Ethan's face crumbled. Not dramatically, not like a building collapsing, more like a mask slipping, the edges giving way, the surface cracking, the thing underneath finally showing through. "I can't ask you to stay," he whispered. "Why not?" "Because staying means choosing this. Choosing a struggling ranch in a dying town with a man who's been emotionally dead for a quarter of a century. Who would choose that? Someone who knows what it feels like to lose everything and find something worth staying for." "Anna, I'm not asking you to ask me to stay. I'm asking you to stop pretending you don't want me to." The silence between them was immense. It filled the space the way water fills a dam, pressing against every wall, testing every crack, looking for the place where it could finally break through. "I want you to stay," Ethan said. 3 words, 5 syllables, 25 years of walls coming down in a single sentence. "I want you to stay," and it scares the hell out of me. It scares me because the last time I wanted someone to stay, she didn't. And I know that wasn't her fault. I know it was an accident. I know I couldn't have changed it. I know all of that now because you taught me. But knowing something in your head and feeling it in your body are 2 different things, and my body still remembers what it felt like to lose everything in one afternoon. His voice broke. "I want you to stay, but I need you to know that I might not be enough. I might not be able to give you what you deserve. I might wake up tomorrow, and the walls will be back, and the silence will be back, and I'll be the same ghost I was before you came here." "And you might not," Anna said. "You might wake up tomorrow, and the walls will be a little lower, and the next day, lower still. And eventually you'll look around and realize you're standing in the open and the sky didn't fall. You don't know that." "No, but I believe it. And right now, my belief is stronger than your fear. So I'll carry it for both of us until yours catches up." Ethan reached for her. It was the first time he'd voluntarily touched another person in 25 years. His hand found hers. His fingers closed around hers. He held on. Anna held on back. On. They stood there. 2 people who had each arrived in this moment from different directions of pain, his from loss and guilt, hers from betrayal and exile, and who had somehow found each other in a broken barn in a town that the world had forgotten. "I'm not Sarah," Anna said quietly. "I'm not replacing her. I'm not trying to be her. And whatever this is, whatever we are, it doesn't erase what you had with her. It doesn't diminish it. It doesn't betray it." "I know. Do you really know that?" He looked down at their joined hands. "Last night," he said, "I went to Sarah's grave. First time in 6 months. I used to go every week, then every month, then less and less. And I felt guilty about that, about the distance. Like forgetting to visit meant forgetting her. And I stood there and I talked to her, like I used to. I told her about the barn, about Richard, about the town meeting." He paused. "About you." Anna's heart hammered. "I told her I met someone who makes me want to be alive again. And I told her I was sorry. Sorry that wanting to live felt like letting her go. And then I stood there, and I waited. I waited for the guilt. I waited for the wave of shame that always came when I even thought about being happy. Did it come? No." His voice was full of wonder, the wonder of a man discovering that the prison door he'd been pressing against for 25 years had been unlocked the entire time. It didn't come. I stood there, and I felt peace. For the first time. Like she was telling me it was okay. Like she'd been trying to tell me for 25 years, and I was finally quiet enough to hear it. Anna squeezed his hand. Tears were streaming down her face. Remembering someone doesn't mean you have to stop living, she said. Ethan pulled her closer. Not into an embrace. Not yet. He wasn't ready for that, but closer. Close enough that their shoulders touched. Close enough that he could feel her presence the way you feel sunlight after a long winter. I spent years afraid of losing someone, he said. I forgot that sometimes you lose people because you never let them stay. I'm not going anywhere, Ethan. The job is just a job. I've had jobs before. I've never had this. This. Someone who needs me, not my words, not my skills, not what I can produce or investigate or report. Me. Someone who needs me. Ethan turned to face her. He lifted his free hand, and slowly, so slowly, it was almost painful to watch, he touched her face. His calloused fingers against her cheek. His rough palm against her jaw. The touch of a man who had forgotten what skin felt like and was relearning it in real time. I do need you, he said, and I hate that I need you, and I'm grateful that I need you. Both things at the same time. All the time. Anna leaned into his hand. That's called being human, Ethan. I'm out of practice. I know, it's okay. We'll practice together. The next morning, Ethan woke up and did something he had never done before. He called Frank Dawson and asked for help. Not with fences, not with lumber, not with anything he could point to and call work. I need a lawyer, he said. A real one. Someone who can take on a development company. I know a guy in Casper, Frank said. He helped my cousin fight an eminent domain case. He's good. Can you set up a meeting? Already on it. Ethan. Yeah. I've been waiting 20 years for you to ask me for something. Don't make it weird, Frank. Too late. It's weird. I'm emotional. My wife is going to hear about this. Goodbye, Frank. I'm proud of you, Ethan. Ethan hung up. He stood in his kitchen holding the phone, and he felt something expand in his chest, something that had been compressed for so long he'd forgotten it existed. He walked to the mantel. He picked up the photograph of Sarah, the one he'd placed there a week ago, the one where she was laughing with her hand on his chest. I'm trying, he said to her. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm trying. He set the photograph down. He put on his boots. He walked out the door. For the first time in 25 years, Ethan Caldwell walked into the morning not as a man running from his past, but as a man walking toward whatever came next. Terrified, unsteady, cracked wide open, and finally willing to find out what happened when he let the light in. The lawyer from Casper was a man named David Kern. He was 61 years old, built like a fence post, and had the kind of face that looked like it had been arguing with someone since birth. He drove into Willow Creek on a Wednesday, shook Ethan's hand with a grip that could crack walnuts and said, "Show me everything." Anna spread the documents across the table in the barn. Kern studied them for 2 hours without speaking. He turned pages. He cross-referenced filings. He made notes in a leather-bound notebook with handwriting so small it looked like code. When he finished, he set down his pen and looked at Ethan. "You've got them," he said. "What do you mean?" "I mean these filings are fraudulent. The signatures are forged. The shell company traces back to Granite Peak through documented corporate links. And the pattern the same playbook used in Montana and Idaho establishes prior conduct. Any judge in Wyoming will look at this and see exactly what it is. Which is organized fraud, land theft through document manipulation. And if your brother is the one who facilitated it, he's looking at federal charges." Ethan sat down. He put his elbows on his knees and stared at the floor. "Federal charges," he repeated. "Wire fraud, forgery across state lines, conspiracy to defraud property owners. These aren't parking tickets, Mr. Caldwell. These are felonies." Anna watched Ethan's face. She expected relief. She expected satisfaction. Instead, she saw something she didn't expect: conflict. Deep, wrenching, painful conflict. "He's my brother," Ethan said. The room went quiet. Kern looked at Anna. Anna looked at Ethan. "Half-brother?" Kern corrected gently. "He's my father's son. He carries my name. And whatever he's done, whatever he's trying to do, he's still blood." "Ethan," Anna said carefully, "he forged your signature. He filed fraudulent documents against your neighbors. He's working with people who have destroyed communities. I know what he did." "Then you know this isn't about family. This is about protecting your home. It's about both." Ethan stood up. He walked to the beam. He pressed his hand against it. "My father made a lot of mistakes. The affair, the way he treated my mother, the way he blamed me for Sarah. But the one thing he believed, the one thing he drilled into me since I was old enough to listen, was that family doesn't abandon family, no matter what." "Your father abandoned your mother," Anna said. The words came out before she could stop them. Ethan flinched. It was a physical reaction, a recoil like a man who'd been struck. "I know," he said. "Believe me, I know. But that doesn't change the fact that somewhere inside me, there's a voice that says, turning Richard over to the FBI makes me the same kind of man my father was. The kind who throws people away when they become inconvenient. There's a difference between throwing someone away and holding them accountable." "Is there?" "Yes, your father threw your mother away because he was selfish. You would be holding Richard accountable because he's hurting innocent people. Those are not the same thing." Kern cleared his throat. "Mr. Caldwell, I understand this is complicated, but I need to tell you something. If we don't act, Granite Peak will. They'll accelerate the pressure on the other landowners. They'll cloud more titles. And eventually someone in this valley, probably Ruth Massey, because she's the most vulnerable, will crack under the pressure and sell. And once one domino falls, the rest follow." Ethan closed his eyes. He pressed his forehead against the beam. "Give me a day," he said. "One day." "You have until Friday," Kern said. "After that I'm filing with the Attorney General with or without your blessing. I have an obligation to the other landowners who've retained me." Kern packed his briefcase, shook Anna's hand, and left. Ethan stayed in the barn. He didn't move from the beam. Anna sat on a crate and waited. She had learned by now that Ethan's silences weren't empty. They were full, overfull, packed with thoughts and feelings and arguments that he was having with himself, because he'd never learned to have them with anyone else. "I'm going to talk to him," Ethan said finally. "To Richard." "Yes." "Ethan, that's a terrible idea." "Probably. He'll manipulate you. He'll try to make you feel guilty. He'll use your father against you." "He'll try. And if he succeeds..." Ethan turned around. His eyes were clear. Not angry. Not afraid. Clear. "He won't. Because I'm not the same man he remembers. The Ethan he knew, the one he pushed around 22 years ago, that man was alone. That man had nobody. That man believed he deserved nothing and expected nothing and fought for nothing except a piece of land." He looked at her. "I'm not that man anymore." Anna held his gaze. She wanted to argue. She wanted to list every reason this was dangerous and foolish and likely to backfire. But she looked into his eyes, and she saw something she'd never seen there before: certainty. Not the brittle certainty of a man who has walled himself off from doubt. The deep, grounded certainty of a man who has finally decided who he is. "Okay," she said. "But I'm coming with you." "No." "Ethan, this is between me and Richard. It started with our father, and it's going to end with us. I need to do this alone." "You don't do anything alone anymore. Remember, that was the whole point." "I know, and I'm not going back to that. But some conversations can only happen between two people who share the same wound. And Richard and I, whatever else we are, we share the same wound. Our father made sure of that." Anna stared at him. Then she nodded. Slowly. Reluctantly. "If you're not back by dark, I'm calling Frank, Pete, Dorothy, Margaret the lawyer, and the state police." "That seems excessive." "That seems appropriate." He almost smiled. Almost. He drove to Cody. 40 minutes on a straight highway with nothing but his thoughts and the road and the ghosts of every conversation he'd ever avoided. He found Richard at the motel, a cheap place on the edge of town that smelled like carpet cleaner and regret. Richard opened the door in a white undershirt and slacks. No suit, no watch. Without the armor of his business persona, he looked smaller, older, tired. "Ethan." He didn't seem surprised. "Come in." "I'll stand." "Suit yourself." They faced each other across the threshold. Two men with the same jawline and the same broad hands, and nothing else in common except the man who had damaged them both. "I know about the liens," Ethan said. "I know about Ridgeline Capital. I know about what Granite Peak did in Montana and Idaho. And I know you're the one who made it happen here." Richard's face didn't change, but his eyes did a flicker of something that might have been fear quickly buried. "You've been busy," Richard said. "My friend has been busy. She's an investigative journalist, a good one, and she's built a case that a federal prosecutor would salivate over." "You're bluffing." "I've never bluffed in my life, Richard. You know that." Richard leaned against the doorframe. He crossed his arms. "So what do you want? You want me to beg, to apologize, to crawl back to whatever hole I crawled out of. I want to know why. Why what? Why this? Why me? Why Willow Creek? You could have partnered with Granite Peak anywhere. You could have made your money off someone else's land. But you came here. You came after my ranch. After our father's ranch. Why?" Richard's jaw tightened. For a moment, just a moment, the mask slipped, and underneath it was something raw and wounded and very, very old. "Because he chose you," Richard said. "What?" "Dad. He chose you, every time. I showed up on his doorstep when I was 18 years old, a kid with no mother, no home, no name, and he took me in. He taught me to ride. He taught me to rope. He gave me a room and a place at the table. And I thought I actually believed that I finally had a family." His voice cracked. "But I didn't. Because no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, no matter how many fences I fixed or cattle I moved, I was never his son. Not really. I was his guilt. I was the proof of what he'd done wrong. And you were the real one. The legitimate one. The one who got the ranch and the name and the legacy." "That's not true." "It is true. He left you everything. Everything. He didn't even mention me. No will. No letter. No acknowledgement. I spent 6 years on that ranch working alongside you, and when he died, it was like I never existed. He didn't leave a will because he died of a heart attack at 62. He didn't plan for it. He had 20 years to plan for it. He chose not to, because including me would have meant admitting to the world what he'd done, and that was more than his pride could handle." Ethan stared at his brother, his half-brother, his father's other son. And for the first time in his life, he saw Richard clearly, not as a threat, not as an intruder, not as the living evidence of his father's betrayal, but as a man carrying his own version of the same wound. A boy who had been told in 1,000 silent ways that he didn't belong. "Richard," Ethan said, "Dad was wrong. He was wrong about a lot of things. He was wrong about you. He was wrong about me. He was wrong about Sarah. He spent his whole life making decisions out of guilt and fear, and he left both of us to clean up the mess." Richard's eyes were wet. He blinked hard. "Don't do that," he said. "Don't stand there and be decent. I came here to take your land. I forged your signature. I know what you did. Then be angry, fight me, do what you always do, shut down, push me out, pretend I don't exist. I'm done doing that." "Since when?" "Since someone told me that burying things doesn't protect them. It just makes sure they never heal." Richard stared at him. "I'm not going to let you take the ranch," Ethan said. "I'm not going to let Granite Peak destroy this valley. And I'm not going to pretend that what you did isn't criminal. But I'm also not going to pretend that Dad didn't hurt you. Because he did. He hurt both of us. And the fact that we've spent 20 years turning that hurt on each other instead of putting it where it belongs, that's his legacy. And I'm done carrying it." Richard's face collapsed. Not into anger, into grief. The deep old calcified grief of a boy who had spent his entire life trying to earn a dead man's love and failing. "What are you saying?" Richard whispered. "I'm saying walk away from Granite Peak. Cancel the deal. Retract the liens. And if you do that, if you walk away clean, I won't press charges. And if I don't, then the Attorney General's office will have everything they need by Friday morning. And Richard, they won't care that you're a Caldwell. They won't care about Dad or the ranch or any of it. They'll care about forged signatures and fraudulent filings and a pattern of behavior across 3 states." Richard was silent for a long time. The motel hummed around them, the ice machine, the highway traffic, the mechanical heartbeat of a building that had sheltered 1,000 transient lives. "You'd really let me walk away," Richard said, "if you make it right." "Why?" Ethan took a breath. "Because I spent 25 years punishing myself for something that wasn't my fault. And I just figured out that punishment doesn't fix anything. It just keeps the wound open." He extended his hand. "Walk away, Richard. Not for me. For yourself. Because carrying this much anger for this long will kill you. And I know that because it almost killed me." Richard looked at Ethan's hand. He looked at Ethan's face. He looked at the man his half-brother had become, this weathered, broken, rebuilt man who was offering something their father had never given either of them. Grace. Richard took his hand. The call to the Attorney General went out Friday morning. But it was Richard who made it. He provided the documents, the corporate connections, the internal communications with Granite Peak that proved the scheme. He cooperated fully. In exchange, Kern negotiated a deal. No federal charges against Richard, full restitution to the affected property owners, and a permanent injunction against Granite Peak operating in Wyoming. The liens were removed within 2 weeks. When the news reached Willow Creek, Frank Dawson drove to Ethan's ranch, walked up to the porch, and hugged him. Ethan stood stiff as a board for 3 full seconds. Then his arms came up. He hugged Frank back. It was the first time Frank Dawson had cried since his mother's funeral. He denied it later. Nobody believed him. The barn was finished in September. Ethan and Anna and a crew of 12 volunteers, including 3 teenagers from the high school who had never held a hammer before, completed the restoration on a Saturday afternoon. The new roof gleamed. The doors hung straight. The beams stood solid the way they had stood since 1938, the way Ethan's grandfather had intended them to stand. That evening, the town held its first gathering in the community barn in 15 years. Dorothy brought enough food to feed twice the number of people who attended. Margaret brought a radio and played music from the 1960s because she said modern music sounded like a dishwasher having a nervous breakdown. Pete Garland danced with his wife for the first time in a decade and stepped on her feet exactly 11 times. She counted. Ethan stood by the beam. His beam. The one he'd leaned against during every important moment of the past 3 months. He watched the people he'd known his whole life, the people he'd helped in secret, the people he'd pushed away, the people he'd convinced himself didn't need him, and who he didn't need, and he saw them laughing and eating and dancing and alive. Anna walked up beside him. "You're smiling," she said. "I am not." "Ethan Caldwell, I am looking at your face right now, and there is a smile on it." "It's a muscle spasm." "It's a smile." "Fine. It's a small one." "It's enormous. Pete Garland just pointed at you and fell off his chair." "Pete falls off things regularly. That's not my fault." Anna laughed. It was the sound Ethan had come to depend on, the sound that had replaced the silence he'd lived in for 25 years. The sound that meant someone was beside him, that someone chose to be beside him. "I turned down the job," Anna said. Ethan looked at her. "When?" "This morning. I called the editor. I told him I appreciated the offer, but I'd found something more important." "What did he say?" "He asked me what could possibly be more important than a senior position at a major newspaper." "And?" "I told him I found a story that isn't finished yet." Ethan turned to face her fully. The barn was full of music and laughter and the noise of a community remembering what it felt like to be whole. But in this moment, standing by this beam, there was only the 2 of them. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know. That was your career, your dream." "It was a career. It was never my dream. My dream was always simpler than that." "What was it?" "To find a place where I belonged. To find someone who saw me, the real me, not the resume, not the byline, not the reputation. Just me. She reached up and touched his face. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. The same jaw his father had, the same jaw. Richard had the jaw of a family that had spent 3 generations hurting each other, and was only now learning how to stop. "I found that here," she said. "I found that with you." Ethan covered her hand with his. He held it against his face. He closed his eyes. "Sarah would have liked you," he said. Anna's breath caught. "She would have liked your stubbornness. She would have liked the way you argue. She would have liked the fact that you showed up at a stranger's ranch and refused to leave until he talked to you." "You think so?" "I know so. She was stubborn too. She would have looked at you and said, 'Finally, someone who can handle him.'" Anna laughed through tears. Ethan opened his eyes. "I love you," he said. The words came out unplanned, unpolished, unprotected. They came out the way water comes out of a dam that is finally broken, not gracefully, not carefully, but completely. All at once. Everything. "I love you, and I don't know how to do this, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, and I haven't said those words to anyone in 25 years, and they feel strange in my mouth, like a language I forgot how to speak. But I love you, and I'm done being afraid of that." Anna stepped forward. She wrapped her arms around him. She pressed her face against his chest. She held him the way you hold something you've been looking for your whole life, and have finally impossibly found. Ethan held her back. His arms closed around her strong, sure trembling. It was the first time he had held anyone since Sarah. It was not the last. Months later, the ranch was different. Not the land was the same. The cattle still grazed the same pastures. The fences still needed fixing. The wind still blew through the valley the way it had blown for 100 years. But everything else had changed. The barn became the center of the community again. Every Sunday, families gathered. Old ranchers taught young ones the techniques that had been passed down for generations, the things Anna had come to document, and that Ethan had spent his life preserving without realizing anyone cared. Anna published her project not as a newspaper article, but as a book. A record of the traditions, the families, the history of a valley that had almost been lost. She dedicated it to 2 people, her grandfather who taught her that work comes before words, and Sarah Mitchell who taught Ethan Caldwell how to love, and whose memory deserved to live in laughter, not in grief. When Ethan read the dedication, he sat at his kitchen table for a long time. He held the book. He ran his fingers over Sarah's name, and he felt something he hadn't expected. Not sadness, not guilt, not the crushing weight that had followed him for 25 years. He felt gratitude. Gratitude for the time he'd had with Sarah. Gratitude for the pain that had broken him open. Gratitude for the woman who had walked into his life and refused to let him stay buried. He picked up the photograph from the mantel. Ethan and Sarah March, 1999, 2 weeks before forever, and he looked at it. He looked at the young man in the picture, the bright eyes, the grease on his face, the unshakable belief that the future was something good. That young man was not gone. He had been buried under 25 years of guilt and silence and self-imposed exile. But he was not gone. He was here, older, weathered, scarred, rebuilt. Standing in the same kitchen, looking at the same mountains, holding a photograph of a woman he had loved with everything he had. And beside that photograph on the same mantel was a new picture. Ethan and Anna standing in front of the community barn on the day it reopened. Neither of them was looking at the camera. They were looking at each other. Ethan set the old photograph down gently. He touched the frame one last time. "Thank you," he said to Sarah, "for everything." Then he put on his boots, walked outside, and found Anna in the barn, organizing records, her glasses crooked, her hair falling out of its clip. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "I'm allowed to stare. It's my barn." "It's the community's barn." "Fine, it's the community's barn. But you're in it, and I'm staring." She looked up. She smiled. The smile that had broken through every wall he'd ever built. "Come help me with these files," she said. "Say please." "Ethan Caldwell, I have never said please in my life, and I'm not starting now." He walked over to her. He kissed the top of her head casually, naturally, the way a man kisses a woman when it has become as instinctive as breathing. She leaned into him for half a second, then went back to her files. This was his life now. Not the prison he'd built. Not the silence he'd worshipped. Not the grave he'd visited every week to renew a promise that had been killing him. This, noise and work and people and love and the terrifying, beautiful, fragile act of being alive. The lonely rancher who had spent half his life hiding from pain had finally answered the question that changed everything. What if you're allowed to be happy again? And the answer that had taken 25 years, and one stubborn woman, and one broken barn, and one town that refused to let him disappear, the answer was yes. It had always